Introducing Addy, a game-changing AI maintenance bot for property management. Addy can, in any language, triage and data capture every maintenance issue, with full voice version coming soon. Addy has learned from over 850,000 reactive maintenance issues carried out by AddyUvo, the leading maintenance call handling service. To sign up for updates and our next testing cohort, go to adiuvo.org.uk/ADI.
Welcome back to Season 12 of the Propcast. I'm your host, Louisa, and this season we'll be discussing all things smart buildings and the digital future. This week on the Propcast, I spoke to Emanuel Heisenberg, CEO and founder of EcoWorks, and Mauricio Weiss, GP and founding partner from Zacua Ventures, about all things renovation, regulation, and innovation. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to Emanuel and Mauricio on the podcast, where they helped me deliver some key insights around sustainability, productivity, and safety and urbanization solutions. In this episode, we tackle the global debate that surrounds whether we become carbon neutral in this current economic climate. Our guests give their subjective opinion on whether this green premium is really sustainable. We also discussed whether having a sustainable element to your products is actually that important. We raised the topic of ever-changing regulations, and one thing is for certain, standardization across the industry is needed, but how and when will this happen? As ever, thank you very much for listening, and tune into our thoughts on all these topics. Today on the podcast, we have Emanuel Heisenberg, CEO and founder of EcoWorks, and Mauricio Weiss, GP and founding partner from Zacua Ventures. And together with our guests, we're going to be talking about all things renovation, regulation, and innovation. So welcome to the show, Emanuel and Mauricio.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to be here.
So our guests are tuning in from different locations. Mauricio is actually in Argentina, about to go to a sort of family wedding. So he has decided to do this rather than celebrating and getting stuck in there. And we have Emanuel, who's actually in Madrid now, visiting some sort of clients there. So, and I'm tuning in from London. So I hope you enjoy it, but we're going to be talking about macro, micro trends when it comes down to basically construction and renovation and the climate. So Emanuel's going to be sharing with us how his product EcoWorks can help tackle key issues around scarcity of labour and materials from factories. And those who don't know EcoWorks, we've been learning all about the product and how the technology can help develop attractive and climate neutral living spaces in just a few weeks, which is pretty fast. Now, you might recognise the name Zacua Ventures. We had Vivian Hedges, who's a dear friend and client, who's another GP based in San Francisco. He was on the previous Context season. But we've got Mauricio joining us, who more focused on, say, the European market. Now, Mauricio is going to share with us, where they're focusing a lot of their time when it comes down to investment, and that's down to growth of certain areas around context and climate. Now, we're all following or attempting to follow the constant changing when it comes to regulation as countries attempt to reach their sort of net zero targets. Obviously, the economic climate is not at its strongest. So we're going to be ending this podcast kind of going through the global debate about whether can we afford to go carbon neutral, what are the long-term and short-term costs of it. Obviously it's all very subjective, but who better to hear from it from obviously founder of a tech business and obviously more on, say, the investment side. So enough from me. Emanuel, thank you so much for joining me. Obviously, we met a while ago at MIPIM. So delighted to finally get you on this podcast as an introduction from the wonderful Arno from JL Spark. I know lots about EcoWorks. Our audience may not. Can you talk us through a bit about you, the product, and I guess why you founded this business too?
So I will start with why do we kind of need this solution, and start, of course, with the emissions. So 40% of the emissions are spent on buildings and 20% of that on materials. And of course, we have to bring that down. That's kind of the story of my life to work in climate tech as a founder for the last 16 years. But of course, also we need not only to decarbonize the largest asset class in the world, but also we have to find technologies to produce affordable housing units from renovation. We cannot scrap down all the buildings and rebuild them with new builds, but it's better to use existing structures. And that's why we built a second skin around existing houses with panels made out of wood and cellulose insulation, where already the entire technology is integrated in the facade and, of course, also in the roof elements. And that's where the solution starts.
Amazing. And your focus is around Germany at the moment, is that correct?
Exactly. We start with residential in Germany. And of course, it will take us a bit to scale that, because it's not only to show that the technology works. So we already have a good proof of product. So the houses we renovated are more than net zero. So they produce much more energy than the tenants require for heating and for warm water and electricity. But also, of course, we have to prove that we can make renovations much cheaper than conventional renovations. So this is a matter of scale. And that's why we kind of first have to scale here in Germany and then bring down costs here and then license out our technology, hopefully, to many, many other countries.
And Mauricio, what about you? Obviously, your focus is more, say, Europe when it comes down to Zacua Ventures. For our audience who might not caught the last episode with Vivian, what is your sort of focus for the business? And it'd be great to get a more of a macro understanding of growth and investments within Europe around sort of climate construction and why your focus is very much that area.
Absolutely. So in a nutshell, Zacua Ventures, it's an early stage fund that focused in the construction industry, so construction technology. We have a very wide approach. We look at the entire value chain of the construction industry, from land development, design, engineering, planning, construction, and operations and maintenance, and vertically across the value chain of production of the building materials, logistics, installation, and end of life, and circular economy, reutilization, and recycling of these materials. The fund has a global scope. So as you know, Vivin, one of my partners, he's based in San Francisco, overseeing North America. I'm based in Madrid, overseeing Europe. And we have another partner overseeing Asia and some team members for Latin America. So quite a global footprint. And we have three main areas of verticals of investments. One is sustainability, decarbonizing the industry. The other one is productivity, making the industry more efficient. And the last one is urbanization solutions, tackling the challenges around the growth of the cities. And I would say that these three, even though we see them present all across the globe, we see major differences in the trends of the different regions, right? So I think there's no surprise in saying that Europe is very, very focused on sustainability. They have a huge regulation and compliance requirement, a lot of requirements from investors and even from the community that were not yet seen in other geographies. That is what one of the things that it's pushing for more technology coming into this area in Europe, against some other like main topics that we're seeing in the US or Asia or even Latin America.
Amazing. And I guess we were going to go straight into that question around regulation and so compliance issues. Like, so for our audience listening in, I was obviously they changed from whether it's Law 97 say in New York, which is coming in, God, and it's in like 3 months or something. But I was saying to our guests, it'd be good to have actual examples of what regulation has happened in say Germany or say in France, because not a lot of founders listening in and other investors are wondering, right, what's going on? Like, if we are looking at growing our businesses in Q1 next year, as the markets are meant to be looking slightly up, what do we need to sort of be aware of? What changes are happening? So, Emanuel, could you share with us a little bit more about, you said Article 9 when we were last chatting, what's sort of going on specifically in Germany, which is obviously your core market?
So I was consulting the German government for the last 10, 15 years. So I worked a lot with regulation, and I can give you a lot of examples where kind of regulation changed markets in a good and a bad way. But I think the most striking one is the the heat pump example in Germany. So in Germany, we had like heavy regulations and subsidies, actually subsidizing fossil fuels and boilers in Germany. So even like 3, 4, 5 years ago, still efficient oil boilers were subsidized by the German government. It was because the lobby for like conventional heating system was super strong in Germany. So, for example, Max Fissmann, the person who ran the Fissmann group, he tried to change kind of the culture in his own company. But as kind of the markets were still running on fossil fuels and the regulation was not pushing towards heat pumps, we never developed a heat pump culture in Germany. So at the end, kind of he had to sell his over 100-year-old family business. He got a really good price, but anyhow, he had to sell it because he could not compete with the US and Asian heat pump prices. So this is an example where kind of bad regulation kind of changed and transformed an entire industry in Germany, and a hugely developed industry where a lot of innovation was taking place, but in the wrong angle, actually was destroyed by the government.
It's crazy how something, have such a big impact as well. What about, that's more say focus on say Germany, Mauricio, in terms of regulation that you've seen, and obviously originally you're sort of based in like Madrid. Is there anything in terms which you're sort of following or changes you've seen in the last sort of 2 years you can share with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are major changes being done in the different regulations, and the good thing is that we even see these regulations coming to some other regions. So when Europe is at the forefront of these compliance requirements, percentage of material reutilization, carbon accounting, disclosure, so being sure that Scope 2, Scope 3, and Scope 3 emissions are being accounted and delivery in the projects, we also see that coming, for example, in the US, in states like New York and California. So this is really putting pressure on the different stakeholders from many different perspectives, and only from a compliance requirement, they would actually need to apply a lot of technology if they want to make these processes very efficient. Right? Because they don't know how to report, they don't know how to do the proper accounting, they don't have all the necessary tools to doing this. And today they're mostly doing this through consultants, for example, and this is just a project by project based. So regulation is actually pushing for a lot of adoption in technology in terms of there are higher requirements, and these requirements just make the processes much more complex, right? So I think that from an efficiency and complexity reduction perspective, there's a lot of opportunities here for technologies. The only issue I would say is that still we don't have common standards, even across the EU. So when France is demanding certain things, Germany is demanding different things, and so on and so forth, right? So we still see that this increases the complexity and reduces the efficiency of this legislation, or at least from a standardization perspective, right? So that's what we're seeing primarily here in Europe. I mean, we can dive deeper in many different use cases, but in general, I think that regulation is good for making the push for that first step into decarbonizing and doing a proper carbon accounting and acting upon that. Then, of course, we need to solve the matter of complexity and standardization to make this really efficient and scalable.
So would you say Europe's ahead in terms of regulation, but still no close in standardization? Are we getting closer to it in terms of in certain countries? I guess every sort of government across Europe is probably saying we're all completely different. Our buildings are different. We were built differently. How can you standardize, these legislations across the whole of Europe? It must be, oh God, I'm trying to think, it's years till we can standardize. Is that even possible to standardize something like that? I'm asking out loud, like Emanuel, you're saying you worked with the German government, and what are their sort of thoughts on standardization?
So at the moment, we kind of have a Minister of Economics called Robert Habeck, and he's from the Green Party, and he used to write children's books. So kind of a lot of conservative industrialists are critical about him. But if you look at the numbers, I mean, they are really doing a great job in the ministry. So they really tackle the 80% renewable energy goal for 2030, and they really decarbonize the heating system with good and aggressive regulations. So this is good. But of course, you always have to keep in mind that, if you go too aggressive, then you of course can also destroy markets, or you can, push prices in the wrong way. So I think, being very long time in the sector, the construction sector invests like 1% in R&D, and the housing sector 0.1%. So they will not bring any transformation towards, affordability and decarbonization. So what we need is people like Mauricio who put in money in the good innovation cycles, and also politicians who understand that and incentivize investments and kind of make a secure investment environment for these technologies to scale and then go in a learning curve and make them cheaper. So I think this has to go hand in hand. So kind of regulators really have to be very close to investors and kind of share the long-term goals and have long-term plans. And then we will be successful.
Mauricio, what are your thoughts on that? What Emanuel just said, as in like a investor's position in the market here, in terms of how you can sort of help work closely with regulators?
Yes, I would add to what Emanuel was saying that it is a very delicate balance, right? Because you do need regulators to start pointing the market into the right direction, but you also want to keep competitiveness and assure like a free environment and a secure environment to make investments and to see the return of these investments. Having said that, we do believe that always at the beginning, or in majority of the cases, as Emanuel was saying, these technologies, they do have this learning curve. And during this learning curve, the most common fact is that the cost is not that effective as of now compared with traditional alternatives. So someone needs to pay that premium, and someone also needs to ensure that the environment is good for pointing into that direction. So I think that, funds like us that support inorganic growth of these technologies play a good role, but we also need to have some incentives from governments to push the different stakeholders and the customers of these technologies to also have some incentives into testing them since the beginning until they go through that learning curve and they're really into a position to scale and delivering like also cost competitive solutions.
Yeah. Well, I guess this also ties into the other question which we want to talk about. Basically, it's like a global debate about whether we can actually afford to create a carbon neutral world with current capex measures. Like, how do we afford it with budgets being cut, or governments like obviously our UK government sort of going back on what they were saying is sort of important when it comes down to putting climate change at our government's one of their priorities. So where I guess what are both, this is all subjective, so audiences listening in, we're not saying this is the right thing, everyone's got their opinions, but Emanuel, you've obviously been talking and writing about this for so many years. Is it doable? Can we achieve it in this economic climate? Are we going about it the right way? What are your thoughts on this global debate?
So I'm really probably not the most objective person on that, because kind of it's spent so many years on it. But if you look at the costs of the extreme weather events, if you look at the insurabilities of our assets and our houses, and also kind of the financing partner who now stopped to finance in certain areas, houses and stuff like that. So kind of the economic effects of climate change are really pushing in now, and this is of course just the start. So if we go to I think the scenario we are facing now is 2.6 degrees, meaning like more than 5 degrees on land, and more than 5 degrees on average on land will lead to immense costs. So a multitude of the cost of avoiding that scenario. And the other thing is, I think, of course, ESG is, it costs, and sometimes it costs a premium, but it's also super important for de-risking. So for example, most businesses I look at which actually neglected decarbonization. For example, I was in the in renewable energies for many years, and the big German utilities actually laughed at me when I was early stage founder like 15 years ago. But then they lost like 90% of their market cap because they neglected the trend. And this will happen also to real estate and construction companies if they don't take it seriously. So it's not about, following these green rules, and, it's not about ideology, but it's about de-risking a risk which will definitely come in the future where the heat comes to the planet.
Mauricio, what are your sort of thoughts on this? You can feel free to answer from more like global perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a global perspective, actually makes this discussion a little bit more interesting, I would say, because on one side, from a pure investment perspective, you want to see technologies that, regardless of the cost today, they do have the levers to potentially become cost competitive in the future, right? So we understand that there's a green premium in many cases today, but that green premium won't be sustainable, right? So we do need to understand, okay, today you're paying 20% more for this material, but as soon as we reach certain scale, as soon as we have access to certain raw materials, as soon as some components of our supply chain become more effective and more accustomed to delivering these type of materials, then with that we will be cost competitive, or we even be lower in price, right? And we do need to see that, for at least to make an investment decision to stay confident that this is something that won't just be sustained by, for example, government subsidies or incentives, right? Which is great, again, as I said before at the beginning, to push for that initial stakeholders or initial customers, but then in the long run they need to be, it's good to do some hand holding, but then you have to let it go and let it run by himself. So that's what we consider as our main criteria when we're making an investment decision in this type of technologies. Now, as I was saying before, from a global perspective, why do I think that it's more interesting to have these discussions? Because in many geographies, and I think that we all know what I'm talking about, ESG is not a good thing to mention when you're actually pitching to a lot of potential customers or potential investors, because they don't believe on that, right? So the question now becomes from us, it's how do you position certain aspects of the ESG? And today we're talking about environment, but also the S and the G are very controversial as well. How do you position that pitch and in order to create a sustainable competitive advantage for that company in the future? And we believe that having ESG in the DNA of a company is key for a long-term perspective. And again, I think that even in these geographies where it's controversial, you need to find a way to adapt your pitch towards that, right? Towards how having a good governance keeps your company much more motivated or engaged into your future goals, how to have a better engagement with the communities, have them much more engaged and pushing for the adoption of your product. And then, of course, having a good impact on the environment also gives you a long-term competitive advantage because of regulations are coming, because of defensibility from a local perspective or regulation perspective, and so on, right? So yeah, we're strong believers of environmental, but also the S and the G, and we do believe that having that embedded into your core strategy would actually create a much more sound and competitive advantage or business strategy.
I would love to see the US pitch of Zacua. It's pretty different probably to the European pitch.
It is indeed, and again, it's all about like understanding who your audience is, and how do you adapt your pitch towards them without changing, of course, the core of your business, but adapting to what they want to hear, and making sure how these policies are actually creating competitive advantage in the future, regardless of whether you believe that ESG is a good or not a good path to go. You do have to have strong beliefs and communicate the competitive advantage that you're gaining thanks to these policies.
Hi, I'm Xander Geronimos, Head of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships at Metaprop, the New York-based venture capital firm that has been at the forefront of the PropTech industry since 2015. In early September, we will launch the Global PropTech Confidence Index, sponsored by PwC, which serves as a biannual barometer for the health of the real estate technology industry. Metaprop also publishes a monthly newsletter that covers all things PropTech, from industry news, upcoming events, recent financings, job spotlights, and more. Subscribe at the footer of our website, metaprop.vc.
So at Mari, our clients, they vary from construction technology to climate, to clean technology, to commercial, and so forth. And over the past couple of years, every single one of them have changed their pitch to have a sustainability play or part of their product to be sustainable. So it's interesting to know that it might not be like the most important thing at the moment for them to be talking about. So this is actually, it's like spin on what a lot has been said in other episodes. That's quite interesting, actually, and a big takeaway from this episode. Mauricio, what about are there any investments in the Zacua portfolio you can share with the audience who seem to be doing quite well? I sort of met, obviously, I think his name's Josh. He was over at the last construction event from Document Crunch. He's still doing well. Are there any ones you want to give like a shout out to who are sort of growing?
Besides EcoWorks, I would say.
Of course, we love EcoWorks. We've got Emanuel on. I've been asking him to come on this podcast since I met him like a year or two ago.
So yeah, companies in the portfolio, surprisingly, I would say they're doing better than ever. So I want to not touch on any specific company because that would be unfair for the rest. But we've frequently been asked about for example, the piece of our investments, right? Everyone is foreseeing an economic turndown. So investors and a lot of stakeholders are questioning whether this is the right moment to be investing in technologies, or an economic turndown will potentially slow down the pace of adoption for technology, right? So the typical elimination of the innovation budget whenever the company is struggling. But we kind of analyze it from a little bit more holistic perspective, not just from a potential economic turndown, but also about from all the other variables that are coming into place. For example, an increased sustainability pressure, what we are discussing today, an increased inflationary environment with supply chain disruptions, geopolitical instability today more than ever, and of course an increased pressure on energy, access to different sources of energies, and so on. And of course, I can't forget about labor scarcity. All of these, and again, in an environment that even though some aspects of it might be slowing down, then some other aspects, particularly from a government investment perspective, that are actually accelerating. Since COVID, you had all these incentives from a infrastructure perspective and so on, right? So what we are seeing is that there are major projects still underway that needs to be developed in this much more complex environment. So for us, the key to really secure the delivery of these projects is technology. You need to conduct these projects with less skilled labor, with much more uncertainties, with inflationary environment, supply chain disruptions, and so on and so forth. So we still believe that technologies will be the key answer for this, and hence we believe that even in an economic slowdown environment, the adoption of technology won't come down. And coming back to your main question about the performance of our portfolio, all of the companies are really increasing their sales, their spread across different markets, not just a local market. So we're super happy and excited about what comes next.
Awesome. And everything which you just addressed then in terms of focus, I think you covered obviously sustainability, you covered obviously due to increased pressure on resources and labor. Everything EcoWorks addresses all of those, which this is why we have Emanuel on the call. Now, I'm conscious of time here. Emanuel, for our audience listening, and you mentioned obviously you're right now, which I think is a great thing, which you're doing as a founder, is really focusing on one market. I think so many founders have to land and expand and don't actually quite nail the first market. Obviously, Germany is a massive country with huge potential. What's for, I guess, the audience listening in, are there any things you could share about the German market for any businesses looking to grow, or maybe could be potential partners? What do people don't fully understand about the German market before they decide to expand their product to it?
So it's of course highly regulated. It's probably a bit under professionalized because on the customer side, the real estate market is not highly professionalized, and also the German construction scene is really not very developed. So we have hardly any good construction company in Germany. I mean, there's Goldbeck and 2-3 others who are great companies, but besides them, most of the big companies went bankrupt in the last years or were sold. So it's probably a good market if you have strong partners. It's a very regional and not very professional market. So with the right partners, it's interesting.
Big opportunity. Amazing. Right, guys, how we end the podcast, so we can let Mauricio go back to actually seeing his founder, considering he's traveled all the way back to his hometown in Argentina. We end it with basically more of an informal question so our audience can get to know our guests. So basically, I would love to know one thing to do with something quirky about yourself. It could be what is your walk-up song before you go on and speak or something? It could be what is your favorite song to listen to? I don't know. What can you share with our audience that they might not know about you, or a hobby or pastime or something like, for us to end this insightful podcast on? Who would like to go first? Mauricio, why don't you share something with us? It could maybe something about Argentina we might not know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very sad that Argentina lost against England the other day for the third place of the Rugby World Cup. So yes, I'm not going to be. I'm going to be honest about that, and yeah, I will leave you with a singer here in Argentina. You know that it's making huge success, and I always like to cheer up your day. She is called Maria Becerra. And yeah, she's crushing it in. It's a very pop and reggaeton type of music. But if you like spicy Latin rhythm, then I would suggest you to listen to her.
I love it. So audience, those who like spicy Latin music, check her out. Awesome. Thank you for that. Emanuel, have you got anything spicy you can leave us with?
And Mauricio's also a rugby player himself, right?
I was, yes.
You're more like my height. I think you're a bit taller, but not tall. Is that possible in rugby? Normally, like I studied in the UK, and there were the only guys who could get a scholarship in Cambridge were rowing and rugby players. So we had like these super tall rugby guys at university. So do they also have like not so tall players?
Absolutely. The best rugby world player today, Dupont, is actually my height. He's French. So yeah, the beauty of rugby is that you have positions for everyone.
I love that. It's very inclusive. I mean, I like that a lot. Emmanuel, what about you? What do our guests not know about you? Share something with us.
Well, what is for a German audience very embarrassing in construction is that I actually studied economic history. So, and that's I never tell that to customers, but this is very strange for German audience that a guy is running a construction company who studied economic history.
It seems to be working. Look, Mauricio, Emanuel, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Thank you for educating me on the importance of obviously regulation, how it's changing, how it's going to change as well. I think we all know the pitch across when it comes down to whether you're a founder pitching to a customer or say a VC looking for investment in different geographies, it's changing a lot. I think everyone was talking about how having that sustainable mission was one of the most important things and almost like on trend 2 years ago, and how it can be slightly changing. However, if we look at the debate, I think probably all people will agree that long-term effects, economic and obviously environmental effects, are not addressing this, and using technology definitely outweighs the short-term costs. So here's to hoping to future growth of EcoWorks and other technologies happening in the sector. And thank you so much for joining the show. I'll catch up with you both later on.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you, Louisa, for having us.